Good afternoon and welcome to our next keynote, Weather Enterprise Keynote, Social Networking, Working and Consuming Data. And I'm going to introduce our moderator, Yaitza, to provide an overview of our next keynote. Yaitza, over to you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Jen. Welcome back to the AMS Washington Forum. I am Dr. Yaitza Luna Cruz, support scientist at NASA Air Science Data System, NASA headquarters with Agile Decision Sciences. For many years, the heart and purpose of the Washington Forum have been to connect science and technology with business and public policy, providing a platform to discuss issues across weather, water, and climate enterprise. We all know that we are facing challenging times and the world is continuously changing. We must adapt to our current reality now. So nowadays, social networking, working and consuming data plays an important factor to achieve that connection, to share our scientific knowledge, and to help support and break communication barriers about risk management across all sectors. To learn more, we are going to hear from our next keynote, Dr. Mayra Oyola Merced. Dr. Mayra Oyola is an atmospheric scientist at the NASA Jet Pollution Lab in Pasadena, California. She also serves as a deputy director of the International Global Navigation Space Systems. She is a representative to the International Association of Geodesy Intercommission Committee on Climate Research, a representative to the World Data Service, and a member of the United States delegation for the International Committee on GNSS in the United Nations. She is also a member of many inclusion and outreach groups, to include the AMS Board on Representation, Accessibility, Inclusion, and Diversity, #AMSBRAID, and a participant of the NASA en Español program. Dr. Mayra Oyola earned a PhD in atmospheric sciences from Howard University and a bachelor's degree in theoretical physics from the University of Puerto Rico at Mayagüez. Without further ado, it is my pleasure to give Mayra the virtual floor.
Well, thank you, everyone. It is a pleasure to be here. As Yaitza mentioned, my name is Mayra Oyola. I am really glad to be here. And if someone had told me 5 years ago that I would be talking about social networking at the AMS Washington Forum, I wouldn't have believed it. Please, next slide. And I'm going to say why. So one of my passions outside of weather is the study of productivity. So in the past, I had in my mind that social media was a deterrent for productivity. This is why I have always been at war with social media. My grad school cohort, my friends can tell you that I was that student who went cold turkey with social media a million times when I was in grad school. I did it during my comprehensive exams. I did it when I was writing my dissertation, and I also did it when I was preparing for field campaigns. And we have a picture here, weapons of mass distraction. Maybe I was not that far from the truth. As according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the average adult will spend 6 years and 8 months in social media, which technically that's an entire grad school career. But the problem with social media is that we get so much information that it may seem interesting at the first glance, but it may be also unimportant, or it may distract us from more meaningful pursuits. And that's how I used to see it. However, as my war continued throughout the last few years, it wasn't until Hurricane Maria that I changed this entire perspective. Please, next slide. So I am from Puerto Rico, as you could hear from the bio. At the time Hurricane Maria made landfall, I was living in Monterey, California. I was working for the Naval Research Lab. I have now a family of my own here in California. I'm in Southern California now, but my burn family, mom, dad, sisters, everyone that's closely related to me, they're in Puerto Rico. After or during the hurricane, I didn't know anything from my family for about 3 weeks after landfall. Being a meteorologist, doing data simulation at a major weather forecasting center, and now being able to help my family was one of the worst experiences that I ever had in my life, something that I don't wish to anyone. It makes you feel very powerless. However, it was a turning point to me with social media, because it was through social media that I could know that my parents were fine. It was through social media that I could get a real grasp of what was going on at the local situation from 5,000 miles away. And that was at a time where the media news were not really giving us, the member of the Puerto Rican diaspora, a perspective of what was going on the island. Next slide. So I have never gone cold turkey again. In fact, I've only embraced social media, and it's not only part of my personal experience, but right now it's something that has become a powerful tool, both in my management and scientific research tasks. And as I will show you in the next few slides, online social media tools can be something, or it can be some of the most rewarding and informative resources for scientists, as long as we know how to use them. Now, next slide, please. I think a major concept or something really important that we need to keep in mind when we talked about social media is that it parallels big data. We've heard the terms Internet of Things and big data as buzzwords in the technology world. We know that they're no longer nice to have technologies, but they're also a necessity. There is a drive to adopt big data within organizations, which has triggered us to use big data analysis tremendously in the past few years. Hence, businesses, universities, government organizations are also rapidly catching up with what we need to use it. Online tools have exploded in popularity and rapid expansion over the last few years, with a number of scientists now looking to take advantage of these web-based resources. And as you can see on the picture on the right of my slide, data really never sleeps. This is what happens over the internet in just 60 seconds. So we get millions of uploads, millions of downloads, and millions of transactions that are basically becoming the backbone of our economy. Please, now we go on slide number 6. When it comes to scientists, why is social media so important, especially in the last few years? For those of you who do not know, the key theme of social media is engagement. As a scientist, it's essential to have that engagement. Social media provides you with a voice. It boosts your professional profile. It acts as your public voice for science. It not only does that, but it also improves your professional networking. As we progress in our careers, it's essential to attend conferences, to give lectures, to lead panel discussions, and network with other scientists about our common interests. However, today there's an endless amount of resources accessible over the internet that allows us to do the same thing. And of course, I'm not saying that we shouldn't actively participate of our conventions and conferences. As a matter of fact, I would rather much given this presentation with all of you in person, but the innovation that we're seeking happens within the lines of different fields. So if we're truly seeking to engage with more people in a transdisciplinary or interdisciplinary ways, then we should not simply ignore the outlet of social media until we try it, as we can connect with much larger audiences. The other thing is that social media can improve online visibility and citations. And we know this, we publish, we heard it many times, publish or purge, that's the motto of our careers. But we also want to make sure that whatever we're publishing gets the recognition it deserves, right? So it has been proven that Twitter mentions positively correlates with rapid article downloads. So as a scientist, as you publish your research, you want to share it with the community, and you want to share it with as many people as possible so they can not only read your novel findings, but they can build upon what you have released to the community. And the final point that I'm making in terms, and this will be the meat of my presentation, is how social media can improve research efficiency. So this is very different to what I used to think in the past. Not only social media has helped me improve my personal research, the organizational engagement within the community that I lead, which is the IGS, but also allows me to know new research techniques and developments around my own field and others. Please, next slide. So thanks to advanced social listening and audience intelligence tools, now researchers are able to aggregate all this data that relates to specific events, topics, or specific audiences throughout media, web, forums, news, blogs, etc. So we capitalize on that to produce what's called social media research. So basically what it is the process of analyzing all of these data sets to conduct both quantitative and qualitative research in order to understand how audiences relate to these topics by using data extractions, or what is called data mining techniques. And now if we go into the next slide, which is slide number 8, we can see in how many ways, especially during the last year with COVID and working from home and learning from home, how social media and other platforms have been able to help us. So first up, it allows us to keep with up-to-date research innovations. I've seen academics exchanging information all over Twitter in terms of research development, materials for classes. I even recall one professor from University of Albany that had developed a fantastic set of tools to draw equations and also drawings for her dynamics class. And she was sharing this information with other members of her community. So in one way, she's sharing her research, helping other teachers and professors develop teaching materials. And it also has become a haven for grad students where they can exchange information and provide each other support, even though they're not in the same university. The other thing will be support for research tools, database, and code. For those of us who code, I code almost on a daily basis. A simple problem would have been an issue years ago. Now we can go online or we can go on Slack and basically consult with someone that has had this problem before. And not only that, this can be applied outside of atmospheric sciences to increase public conversations in terms of study topics as varied as economy, climate change, COVID-19, etc. Now, in terms of productivity and networking, as I mentioned before, one great thing is these network communities that allow us to support software and other developments, for example, new developments in Python, MATLAB, R, and other languages that we use on a daily basis. Please, on the next slide. So doing research online is it's paradoxically both easy and hard. So there's so much information available that can be staggering. We could use potentially mundane copy and pasting and screenshotting to do research. And of course, we can move into more sophisticated ways to use freely accessible information. For example, the application of accessible application program interfaces, or APIs. Now, we've known and we heard it many times that with the aftermath of many data breaches, some certain media platforms have been limiting the amount of data that get out of their networks. However, it still may be possible for us to get some information. Twitter's a big one that just released a Twitter for Academics API that allows researchers and graduate students and even people who are in the government to use this to do research. And even in the websites or social media networks that do not have such as a comprehensive API, there's still ways to conduct qualitative and quantitative research, such, for example, interviews, surveys, and other interactions with community members. Next slide, please. So as we go forward, there are three major techniques that we can apply specifically for the weather enterprise in order to better understand what's going on out there and how can we include this into our research and applications in order to protect life and property. So these are basically a transdisciplinary approach for weather and climate, as most of these methods actually come from anthropology. One of them is ethnography. So normally ethnography is the study of cultures and peoples. It can be traced back to anthropological studies in the 1900s. But basically what it does is to study people in their natural setting. And this kind of sounds like an oxymoron because we're trying to study people in their national settings, but at the same time, we're taking this concept to the virtual world. So I'll explain a little bit more about that later on. The other method is Netnography, which is basically a framework created by Robert Cousinet, and there's a paper published, Cousinet et al. In 1998. So basically, it uses consumer research and ethnography, a previous method that I mentioned. And this is a much more comprehensive approach because there's techniques that are very specific. It uses more structure and numeric explicit steps. And it's more used or more applicable for academic research because of the nature of the methodology itself. And of course, there's digital sociology, and we know sociology is a study of human society. So digital sociology takes both skills and applications for ethnography and virtual ethnography to study human society. So that's how it differs from the other two methods. The other two methods may be more focused in the individual, as you can see in the graphics, and digital sociology just looks at the society as a whole. Please, next slide. So in the case of virtual ethnography, as I mentioned, we're studying people in their natural setting, but we are translating the concepts of the physical world into the online world. So how do we do that? We can apply interviews, sometimes online verbal interviews, or we can use text services. We have all experienced that when we get a text on our phone trying to have a little survey. So that's the type of technique that it's involved here. We could do it through observation and logging information from our observations. However, as an observant, you're not really interacting with the community, you're just observing. Most of this data, again, it can be qualitative in nature because you use narratives and descriptions to record it. It's mostly qualitative, but it can turn quantitative with the use of some data tools that are available. And again, because of the nature of ethnography, it might be better suited for smaller groups or smaller websites rather than bigger groups or bigger websites. Please next slide. So on slide 12, we are talking now about netnography, which is basically the study of people using marketing skills. So we can apply the same types of methods where we look at observations and field notes and online surveys or text surveys. However, there's another element to it, which is that we track digital data. So we use evidence of user activities, for example, retweets, hashtags, how many times a picture got retweeted, etc. We record and store that data. We still can use field notes, obviously, as supporting material, but this is more about statistics. There are analyses that are more specific in terms of using descriptive analytics, discourse analytics, and critical discourse analytics, and also using qualitative approach to supplement. And the difference between the previous one and this one is that it provides a how-to guide. It's more specific, so it's a more reliable framework across a number of academic disciplines that can be applied for the weather enterprise. As a disadvantage, it's because it's so complicated and it has so many steps, it may be too much if we're just trying to look at something simple or a simple approach or something that's more broad rather than specific. Please, next slide. Now, when it comes to digital sociology, again, we utilize surveys, interviews, visual data, observations. We keep track of that digital trace. We still use the same types of data and analysis. However, instead of looking perhaps just as the individual, we're looking more as the society as a whole. So this is an advantage, for example, for government applications and not necessarily academic applications, but it's developing. So sometimes finding a how-to guide for digital sociology might be a little bit harder. Okay, so now moving on to slide 14, I just want to show you how these techniques are starting to emerge on our own community. So we can see a number of publications that have been increasing, especially over the last year or so. Publications that go and talk about how people react to weather and how it affects their mood, to applications to traffic, but also more specific applications to forecasting, to hurricane forecasting, to fire forecasting. And if we go into the next slide, I'm actually going to show you one example that's very dear to heart, very dear to me living here in California, which is utilizing social sensing as a tool for remote sensing. So specifically for wildfires. This study was published in 2016 by Bolton et al. From Exeter University. What basically they did is that they collected a social media post related to wildfires in California and on other areas of the West Coast of the United States using APIs and Python. They utilized different hashtags. They basically narrowed their research utilizing wildfire, bushgrass fire, wildland, etc. And you see some of the examples of the keywords that they used. Now they compare these keywords with occurrence data from MODIS and other supporting satellite platforms that are specific for fire detection. And they did geotagging, so basically comparing the data sets over different time periods and the periods that are specific for the fires. Over a specific region, which is again the region of California and Nevada, and they created this heat map that we can see on the next slide, which is slide 16, which basically shows that social media activity about wildfires is both temporarily and spatially correlated with the wildfire events. And this is fantastic because in the same way, we can utilize other events to create heat maps and to provide assessment of the situations. Now, I'm going to move on into a slightly different aspect of social media and how we relate it as a scientist. And if we go into slide 17, I think one of the messages, if you didn't hear anything from my presentation, I really want you to go home with this. And let's be very clear. I used to admire people who could stay away from social media because my perception was, wow, these people are normally focused on work. But over time, the reality that I have experienced and the reality is that whether you like it or not, whether you have social media or not, you do have an online presence. Your name is out there. So the question is, do you want others to control your social media presence, or do you want to make sure that you do? And in that sense, we should take advantage of the concept of branding. So for example, for a Weather Enterprise member, our brand is our work, what do we do for a living, and also how do we perform that work, or how that work has been reflected over time. And for us, that will be number of publications, number of technology transitions, maybe number of presentations, positions that we have had, president of AMS, member of XY AMS committee. These things are important because they do define how do you perform. Please, next slide. In the famous words of Jeff Bezos, your personal brand is what people say about you when you're not in the room. And again, even if you have social media or not, people will be talking, will be seeing you, because we all have at some level some online presence. On the next slide, one thing that we should take into consideration as we contemplate either opening social media networks or going through this branding process is identifying what is important for us. So, for example, here we're all related to weather and climate, but what makes you special? What are your strengths? What things differentiate you from others? And sometimes people think these are questions that students and early career scientists need to ask themselves, but that's really far from the truth. So as we progress in our careers, it is very important for us to ask these questions because we evolve, right? So not only what makes us special at that time, but how does your uniqueness translate to value? So what are your most significant accomplishments? Again, you may be a published author of 1,300 publications, or you may have been the president of a major society, or maybe as a student, you have volunteered into different organizations and you have some leadership skills that other students may not have. It is super important that you utilize this and understand why people will come for you. What is their expectation, or what is the vision of who you are? And that links into the last question, which is basically, what do you want to be known for? Do you want to be known as a remote sensing expert? Do you want to be known as a leader in the community? These are things that are really important for us to contemplate. Now, please, on the next slide. We could potentially have a seminar, and a full day seminar or a workshop talking about branding and how to do it not only for yourself, but for your organization. And this is extremely important, again, because it gives us purpose and direction. We all have a brand, whether we intentionally shape it or not. So again, it's important that we take time to take control of that branding. So I actually had this exercise with some students last week, university students last week, where we went through the exercise. Obviously, because of time, we're not going to have it here. But this is something that on your own time you should think about. For example, having time for self-reflection. So list 5 things that you're mostly proud of. And not only that you're proud of, but explain why you're proud of those accomplishments. Now, based on that, you can utilize 2 or 4 words to finish the sentence that I have here, which is, my work shows others that I am. My work shows others that I am a distinguished scientist because I have X number of publications. My work shows others that I am a community leader because I've served in XYZ community. These are things that after that process, you keep that step 2 of results for yourself. And then you find a colleague, a mentor, a peer, someone that knows you, and you can give them that first part where you write your self-reflection and you list those things that make you special and that you're proud of. And then you ask them to write that statement for you. And at the end, you compare your statement from their statement and see how they differ. Once you go through that process and you understand how other people see you, the last point will be to look at your CV, look at your resume or your CV, and make sure that you answer, what would you do differently in order to brand yourself in the way that you want to be perceived? And again, this is a very useful process. It's not something that you do once in your lifetime, and it's something that is applicable whether you are an early career scientist or you are at the end of your career ready to transition into something else. Please, next slide. After that branding, you have to make sure that you utilize social media in the right way, that social media or your multiple social media platforms reflect what your branding is. I am not here to tell you which social media to use. Some of them are more convenient for other people, depending on what you want to accomplish and the audience that you want to target. But there are certain elements in common that you must are suggested that you maintain. For example, a brief biography of who you are. But then again, please stay away from PII. For those of us who work for organizations, it's important that we follow our organizational guidance in terms of PII and what's appropriate and what's not. Also include links to your social media websites or for example, people that have websites, or sometimes you have your signature blog. If you feel comfortable adding your LinkedIn link, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, whatever it is that you're using, that's something that you can advertise. Use your name, use the products or services you provide, whether you work for a private company or you do satellite remote sensing or modeling or policy, anything that you do, I think it's important that people know. Also include your key client. And again, that is if it is appropriate to include key clients. I know some organizations are more strict about certain things than others, so always consult with your organization on this. And your education. I've been told many times, and I think this is true for early career scientists and also for women, and I've lived it myself, where we feel uncomfortable about talking about our educations and everything that we have accomplished because we feel like we're bragging. And there's nothing wrong, I would say there's nothing wrong with including your education. That is not bragging. That actually tells people you are an expert. Your education is the backbone of who you are and the things that you have accomplished. So feel free to add your education to your social media. Also, it will support if you have any conversation with people outside of your field, that will be, again, a backbone to represent who you are. And content, always include content, whether would you use videos, photos, articles, presentations, things that you have accomplished. It is important for people to see what you have done. As a quick example, as we're about to wrap time, again, I mentioned, and Yaitza mentioned at the beginning, that I am the Deputy Director of the International GNSS Service, a Central Bureau. This is a program that's supported by the NASA Space Geodesy program. The IGS, it is a voluntary federation of over 142 funding agencies, universities, and research institutions. So if we can go, please do slide 22, 23. You can see what the IGS is. And so basically, what we do is we provide free service and products, geodetic products, specifically GNSS, which is basically GPS and all of their international partners, right? So we provide these free products accessible for everyone to use. They're highly used by space agencies around the world. We provide reference frames for the ITRF, or the International Terrestrial Reference Frame, which the latest version of the ITRF, it's coming up. We also support geodetic research, and part of the geodetic research is climate and weather. And if you have heard of radio occultations, that's one of the things that we support. And if we go into the next slide, we can see the distribution of the 509 stations that we have all over the world. Now, even though you see a map that's kind of covered, there are regions in the world that we have very poor engagement with. And if you remember, part of my presentation talked about social media being an engagement tool. So the reasons for the lack of engagement are many: political, economical reasons. Sometimes we have language barriers, especially with developing countries. So what we try to do is actually going through this exercise of rebranding and also including strategic planning to see in which ways we could better connect with our international community. And what we found is that one of the best ways to do that was to revamp our website. So if we go to slide number 25, I think we can see on the left, this white panel, that was our old website. It had large blocks of text, no room between clear sections. It was so confusing, inconsistent. It had so much great information, but it was difficult for people to access. So after this process of rebranding, we identify who we want it to be, and we go into the next slide. And this is what our new website looks like. And it's a lot more, it's bigger, it's a lot more brighter, it's easier to manage, there's a lot more content. And ultimately, if we go into my last slide, or pre-last slide, we saw some results. So how do we account for this branding results? So first up, we saw a 72% increase in social media engagement from all over the world. Our website now has 58% more visitors, and we had a 98% increase of engagement with developing countries and non-member colleagues. So, and this is huge. That means that our job is getting noticed. So I'm going to wrap up this presentation with one last thought. If we go to last 28, and that is engage, enlighten, encourage, and especially be yourself. Social media is a community effort. Everyone is an asset. Remember, as a scientist, you are an asset. You're the voice of the scientific community. Now, I'm going to open the floor for questions or comments. Please feel free to address those.
Thank you so much, Myra, for so insightful presentation. We have a question in the chat from Professor Brian Golding, and the question is, use of social media has resulted in the emergence of, quote, everyone is an expert, and quote, every new piece of research replaces what went before. As researchers, how do we use social media in a way that adds to the credibility of the science rather than destroying it?
That's an excellent question. And I think most of the time, we can think of this within the context of being outside of social media, right? Even with our families, we have a conversation about science, and sometimes we get a little bit of resistance. I think that's why it is important for us to constantly post correct information, to validate, constantly post the research that we're doing, so people know that our science is validated. And I think the most important thing is that when we have these conversations, sometimes it happens that someone's going to challenge us, that we don't make the person feel stupid. And I think that's a big issue. No one likes to be insulted. The moment you insult or belittle someone, they're going to stop listening. So as frustrating as that can be for us as scientists sometimes, it's better for us to come to a place of teaching. Now, there's two different types of people, right? There's people that simply don't know, and they may be asking questions because they don't know. And there's people that they just don't want to listen. So, and that's the other part too. Like we have to be mindful that we are investing our time to teach the people that don't know, and recognize it, and it's hard, right? But recognize the people that just don't want to learn, because sometimes that brings the worst of us, because we're still human. So I think it is a balance, but that's why it's very important to have that presence and continue to validate everything that, research, publications, presentations, everything that you do. So people know that, you're not coming out of nowhere with no knowledge. You are a person that's completely prepared to talk about that subject. And also the other part of validation is that we are experts in our field, but we're not experts across the board. Even within meteorology, there's different divisions. So if there's something that you don't know, instead of trying to make answers for it, it's better to say I do not know, because in that way you're going to gain people's respect.
Okay, thank you, Myra. We have another question from Tamara Baro. Excellent presentation, Myra, she says. One question. Sometimes social media can be overwhelming to join and navigate, such as Twitter. How would you recommend that someone enter into this world without being swallowed by it.
Oh yeah. So that's another thing I really struggle with. And I was watching I'm not gonna say which show, but I was watching a reality show not too long ago, and the host said to the contestants, don't read the comments. And I think that there's some value. Obviously, we want to know what people are saying, but there's some valid points to that too. When someone posts, sometimes if there are posts or comments under your post that are going to be valid or questions, but we have to learn how to ignore things that we cannot answer or things that are personal attacks. It has happened to me many times. I think also regulating time. I know it's addictive. It could be addictive where we are always checking. I think it is important, especially if we're focused on science, maybe plan our posts ahead of time. There are tools in which you can plan your posts. You can go post and limit your interactions at, let's say 15 minutes a day, 20 minutes a day, things like that. And that can help us. And if it becomes too overwhelming, just time to disconnect, take a break.
Okay, so we only have 4 minutes left. So we have another question. Science is not a social opinion, but evidence-based facts. What do you recommend about spreading a consistent message across all sectors to avoid public confusion?
Yeah, that's important. And I think, again, on that, it is important that we keep in touch with our professional societies, understand what the consensus message is. Same thing with your organization. Make sure that you attend, even within your organization. For example, I work for JPL. JPL has fantastic presentations from other colleagues in missions that I'm not involved with. But because I work at JPL, I know I'm going to get these questions from the community. So it's important that you keep up to date with what your colleagues are doing, with what your AMS is posting, and that you understand that message. And also keep up to date with everything that's going in terms of science. Before you post, if you think that there's something that you're about to post that's not necessarily, you're not completely sure about it, consult it with someone. I think that there's a beautiful Twitter community too. Oh, Atmospheric Scientist, that it's a good place for people to bounce ideas as well.
Okay, any other question for the audience? You can raise your hand if you want. Okay, well, thank you for joining us. Thank you, Mayra, for giving this insightful presentation. And we will see you in our next session. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Yes, folks, we will start again at 2:25, where we will have a session with Dr. Bill Hook on the policy impacts on enterprise value. So thank you again for the presentation we just had. We'll see you at 2:25. Thank you so much.